Hello, everybody. I believe that some folks are still arriving to this space, but I just really wanted to welcome you to this room. Welcome to the Seizing the Moment Symposium, as well as what is called and known as on the event program as the Region B session. It's the afternoon in British Columbia right now, and I think closer to evening on the East Coast. My name is Jackie Wong, and I'm really excited to facilitate this session. I work with SFU's Community Engaged Research Initiative in Vancouver, BC, on unceded and stolen Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh homelands, and I'm really curious about how to bring a decolonial lens to this work, not only in how we think about this work, but also in how we do this work, and that's something that that informs my thinking every day in this position. I'm really excited to introduce this session, which is a mini session and kind of a series finale in context of some of the work that we've been doing at SFU CERi. This is the final installment of a monthly webinar series that we've been holding here in Vancouver about challenges and concerns related to community engaged research. It's a series that has been called Remaking the Table, and we've been running it monthly since November 2020, with just a brief break in December. And what we've been doing is we've been holding a monthly webinar that touches on an ongoing challenge or concern related to community engagement and research, and thinking about it through the lens of trauma-informed practice, cultural sensitivity, thinking about how equal pay and paying people equitably factors into this work. And today's session is looking at regional considerations related to community engaged research, and particularly thinking about Surrey, BC as a case study for this work. And Surrey is a major city that is a little bit south of Vancouver, and it is intersecting with the homelands of the Semiahmoo, the Katzie, and the Kwantlen First Nations. And it's a city in Vancouver that I think there's a lot happening in the city that I think tells us a lot about city building and where we are at in terms of equitable community practice. And yet at the same time, it's not always part of the public conversation in the way that that issues related to our big cities like Vancouver and Victoria are. And part of the reason for this session is to try to unpack what can be a sometimes problematic centrality around our discussions that center around major urban centers or places that hold different kinds of social and cultural and political capital, while ignoring sometimes, and to the detriment sometimes, of other communities that are just as important. And so as we move into this work, I just wanted to take a moment to thank the wonderful team here at SFU CERi for leading us to this point, and also for all of their work in producing these events and making them happen so smoothly from behind the scenes, and also sometimes in front of the scenes. Their names are Joanna Habdank, Tyne Johnson-Dillon, Janani Ravakularam, and Am Johal, who's in this room. All of you have been so instrumental in making this work possible, and it's been such a pleasure to be able to do this alongside you. And I'm so excited to hear from our panelists today, all of whom, to me, really embody a really important intersection between community and what's possible in university campuses writ large. I know that the focus of this particular session was about campus community partnerships in the context of the pandemic and the social inequities that have surfaced during this time. And I think that all three of the people who are speaking today, their names are Alicia Massie, Aman Chandi, and Jasmeen Virk. All three folks have a really, I think, wonderful way of embodied practice that we don't always see. And they're all very, their work is very deeply rooted in community contexts, in community organizing, and in grassroots initiative that I think are really important to listen to when we think about meaningful community engaged research. So before we get started, I just wanted to draw our attention to the way in which we're gathering today and what that means for this space. And Janani is just going to be posting some community agreements in the chat. And those speak to kind of the conventions around how we will be in this space, particularly when this era of multiple Zoom meetings often stacked on top of each other can really lend to some questions about how we even are in this world and to each other. And so I just wanted to flag that here in this room, we're hoping to really convene a space that is fruitful for learning while acknowledging the many journeys that people are on, particularly in terms of diverse learning journeys, diverse life experiences, and the many geographical and political contexts that people are arriving at this space from. So in that spirit, we're listening to learn, we're accepting and also expecting non-closure. We might come out of here with more questions than answers necessarily, but that's part of the work. And I think that's part of the question about how to meaningfully do CER in context and to the benefit of communities. We're in what I think is a very limiting space around how we come to know each other and understand each other. And so we're asking folks to arrive here from a place of non-judgment without assuming people's pronouns, genders, or other identifiers based on a username or a video image. And we're really looking to curate a space or create a space in which there's zero tolerance for violent and oppressive behaviors. I also wanted to introduce a secondary space that people can use to post their ideas, to kind of get into a place of thinking and brainstorming and some generative work as we move through this session. Janani's posting the instructions there on Padlet. It's an online tool that mimics a collaborative whiteboard. And here is a space where we have posted some of the questions that we were asked to think about as we were holding this session. And they have to do more specifically with campus and community partnerships. And also really curious and inviting everybody to be able to post any reflections that are coming up for you as people are talking, because what folks are about to share about their work, I think very much speaks to some of the questions that are posted in Padlet, but also asks some really useful questions that move us beyond that which we might see on the page, but that which we might wish to reflect on and iterate on as we move through. Also really welcome you to post any questions in that space or also in the chat so that we can ask those of people after our time together. In terms of how this time will be structured, we're just starting here with some opening remarks, and we'll move into an opening discussion with our panelists, after which we will have time for audience questions, as well as a final close from the panelists, and then we'll be on our way. So while I think that there had been 90 minutes allocated for this session, I don't think that we will run to that time at the end. I'm estimating a 73-minute runtime. It might be shorter than that. So I just wanted to structure that out of respect for everybody's time and the fact that attending these things can be challenging in the context of the day. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our first speaker, and I'd like to invite Alicia to come into the event space here. Alicia Massey is just a wonderful human who I'm really glad to know and glad to have here in this room. I think that Alicia's work is being talked about in the chat here. And in addition to her work, she was just teaching right up until this moment that she's arriving in this room. She's a PhD candidate at the School of Communication at SFU, which is how I've come to know her through some of the work that's intersected with CERi. And one thing that I've been really excited about and grateful for from the times that we've been able to share space together has been really the way in which I think you really exemplify an embodied practice and an embodied approach to how to create more inclusive spaces for community to connect and for people to show up as their best selves in doing this really hard work around gender, labor, and race and late capitalism. These are very pressing and important topics. And I think that you do it with a great degree of care, which I really, really appreciate. And so I'd love to begin this conversation. We have about 10 minutes here with Alicia. So I will start our conversation with one question, and then I'll move into another one that touches on Surrey a little bit more specifically. But first, I would love to ask you, Alicia, about what's coming up for you when you think about the energy for the challenges around community engaged research at the moment. And this is kind of thinking about what the pandemic has shown us about this work, and also potentially about where you'd like to see it move next.
Thank you so much, Jackie. It's so wonderful to be here, and what a lovely introduction. I'm flattered. I think that's a great question, of course, and it's huge, right? It's almost difficult to answer because your mind starts going in all these different directions. But in thinking about, I've been sort of keeping in the mind frame of thinking about regional differences and thinking about Surrey in particular. And one of the things that I think has been a theme through most of my work in this area, but I think absolutely the pandemic has sort of emphasized, is that people are very tired. People are very exhausted. People that do community engaged, community-based, community-focused work are often working very, very hard. And they have a lot of moving pieces and a lot of like balls that they're juggling in the air. And I think that unfortunately the pandemic has in many ways heightened those stresses while also pulling back on some of the resources and some of the supports that we would have previously used to sort of help combat some of that burnout. And I think that in certain regions, this can be more intense than in others. And I think that that can be something that's really important to think about when we think about community engaged research, is to think about the infrastructures or lack thereof that we have to support the people doing this work. And unfortunately, through all of the terrible things that we've struggled through with this pandemic, some of those supports are now gone. And working from home, working from not home if you don't have a place to work from, figuring out how to make those connections, how to stay in touch with the people that sort of like bring you that energy, bring you that life, make you feel grounded. Some of that stuff can be really hard to find even in the best of times. And unfortunately, we are not in the best of times. So I think one of the things that I've really been thinking about is how to build from this point forward, taking that into account and hopefully moving towards community engaged research and community engaged projects and just community in general that is grounded, that is supportive, and that is there for each other so that we don't feel burnt out, exhausted, or like we're at the end of our rope and we have nothing left to give, because sometimes it can feel like that. And this work is too wonderful and too important to let not happen.
Thank you. And I'm really, really resonating with what you're sharing right now, particularly about the exhaustion, the burnout that has been, I think, endemic in this work for a long time, and particularly surfacing in this time. Really looking forward to hearing from Aman and Jasmeen in a little while, where they're going to be talking a little bit about care practice and the role of care in this work, particularly. The other question that I have is a little more specific, and I'm curious about your research in Surrey and what that revealed to you about regional particularities and meaningful community engagement.
Yeah. So I actually am going to relate my answer to this question to my answer to the previous question, because I was kind of thinking about this before. So the project I'm referencing in particular was a project I performed last year that did, to a certain extent, get a little bit derailed due to pandemic times. But one of the things that I was doing was mapping community engaged work that was happening through SFU and in the region of Surrey. And this was a project that was so interesting and ended up being such a rich discovery because there was so much work happening. There was so much amazing, like faculty-led, community-led, integrative, like all amazing stuff happening. But it was extremely disconnected from each other. And one of the main findings through doing this mapping work was that mapping needed to be done, and that people did not necessarily feel like they had a central place to come to in the same way that they felt like they did somewhere like Burnaby or Vancouver. And what this resulted in meant that work that was already happening was not known to people who would absolutely love to know that it was happening. And one of the things that this made me think about is it's not enough to have these sort of like central hubs or home bases in only Vancouver or in only Burnaby or in whatever place you're in. It is really important to recognize that when we're doing community-based research in particular regions, even if those regions are not sort of the dominant space for the university or the research center or whatever you might be working on, it is still fundamentally important to have a place to bring together those particular researchers, those particular facilitators, community members to come together in that region, in that space. And that was something that was really wanting in Surrey, is people wanted to be able to share what they were doing. They wanted to know what their colleagues were doing. Was there someone that was already working with those school boards? Was there somebody who might already have like some projects on LGBTQIA+ stuff? Those questions were really on people's minds, and there just really wasn't an easy place to go about finding that information. And it is really labor intensive. So I think we can all recognize the extreme value in sharing projects and collaborating and learning about what your colleagues are doing, especially in challenging regional, environments where it might be spread out a lot. So that was one of the things that I think can both be a support to help resist against the exhaustion and the burnout, but it can also be sort of proactive in building connections and fostering collaboration and even further community work in a way that it sort of, it grows itself, hopefully.
Yeah, and thinking about how to foster that spirit of cultivation and organic growth is really, I think, such an important and fruitful thing to think about, particularly when we're considering how to decolonize this work. Where do we move from this very kind of Western imperial culture of needing to push to work so hard all the time towards these very capitalist aims, and think about what gets lost in that push and how to then do the work differently.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think we on this webinar, on this call know this, but it can sometimes be a little bit, you still have to put it out there for other folks, is understanding that sharing space, sharing knowledge, sharing emotions, sharing exhaustion can all be generative parts of creating place-based and community-based knowledge. And it can sometimes not feel like it because it's not getting you a publication. And, sometimes it can feel like just sitting there with your colleagues in complete and utter exhaustion and having a cup of coffee. That can be invaluable time and invaluable moments to both respect the people around you, respect yourself, respect the work you're doing. And sometimes that can mean having a physical space or virtual or, even just mental. But that's one of the things that, for me, at least in 10 minutes, I would sort of say, I think is such an important element. And luckily at CERi, we have had that. We'll get back there post-pandemic, hopefully. But for somewhere like Surrey, it would be amazing, even beyond just the SFU campus. People would really love to have, even to have, a hub to come together and share that space, share that knowledge, share those experiences.
Thanks so much, Alicia. We're really looking forward to hearing from you a little bit more later after we hear back from Aman and Jasmeen. So,
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I will ask you now to turn your camera off, and for Aman and Jasmeen to turn their cameras on and arrive here. Hello, both of you. I'm so happy to see you here. As we were preparing for this session, Aman was sharing with me that some of your work, or a lot of your work, the way that you work together is often done in a conversation that's ongoing in both English and Punjabi, and that to me feels like such a familial and beautiful dynamic, I think. And I'm really happy to see you here because I think it's important to embody and model the ways in which friendship and connection that's beyond what is understood as the professional can really help us in building those care structures around this work. And I'm really glad to introduce both of you and also share space with you. I've come to know Aman over the last few months, as Aman was a graduate fellow in the SFU Community Engaged Research Initiative, and I was able to learn a little bit about her work through that context. And we've kept in touch in some ongoing collaborations, and just really excited to hear from you here about your approaches really to this work. I think there's something really valuable to me about the how that you bring to this work, the questions around the how. And that's something that I've learned so much from. And Jasmeen, really welcoming you to this space as well. Your work, doing video work that you'll be sharing, both of you will be sharing with us in a little while, is really helpful to hear about, and just really wonderful to hear about your collaborations, which we'll get into in just a moment. So picking up a little bit on what Alicia was sharing earlier, I'm curious about how your work together has revealed certain nuances of community engagement, particularly in the pandemic. And I'm curious about what your work has revealed about cultivating a care practice as part of community engaged research.
Thank you, Jackie. And that's a great question. Actually, Alicia was saying very similar things to what we have felt in regards to burnout and just like being active during COVID, given everything that's going on around us, and like finding the energy to be there for community when there's trouble at home, and it's we're feeling it in ourselves. So just gathering that strength to do this work was very difficult. We in my research, I've been also I just finished my data collection, and my research has been done predominantly during COVID-19, and just noticing how people feel about the work that they've done. And I've been hearing a lot of negative stories around just not people a lot of community heroes that I regard them as heroes are feeling very burnt out and not appreciated, or not being able to adapt quick enough to online technologies to get access to community and things like that. So that's been quite sad to see. And I know some people that have been longtime community members and activists are leaving that space just because they're feeling that they are not really, feeling the benefits of community in the COVID spaces where we interact now, like via Zoom or wherever, right? And also many of the activists that we work with, and artists and community organizers, are precarious in terms of their housing and their income. So for them, having community and organizing community spaces was a way for them to a simple act, just get it, and taking the leftovers home was very important for them, because that meant that they had dinner for a few days. So even not having that now in the Zoom environment and COVID, it's been interesting to see how that care for other has really not being it's the care for the self that's being I think being promoted in the community now more than care for others. But we did start a care basket program in our community spaces, where we provided food, with the support of SFU Community Engaged Fund, food for 40 families for 6 months. So, we are still opening the space up, and we're doing all these things, but it's just been very difficult to do the care work that we want to do while take care of ourselves and those in our community. Jasmeen, do you have anything to add to that?
No, yeah, you covered the ground really well there. It's true. It's been exhausting. So seeing that in myself, having then gathering the energy to go out and continue to do work has been difficult for sure. So I would say personally, I haven't been as involved as I would like to. And I keep feeling there's a guilt involved with that as well. Because sometimes you question, because I could do it before, why can't I do just as much work now? So But knowing that everybody's feeling that this way, and there's a reason behind it, there's a bigger reason than I could really control, is somewhat of a solace as well. So, yeah.
Thanks so much. I think that Aman is just starting to queue up some slides that you wanted to share with us. I've been experiencing that guilt as well, Jasmeen, that question around, I think it raises the question around how very limited so much of our capacity is right now, and how stretched many of us have been for a long time and continue to be. Pass it back to Aman to introduce this set.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
We're just seeing there's like a gray box in front of it right now. Maybe it's a video box, or there it is. We're good.
Okay, those are my notes, so I'm just going to move it to the side. Can you see it?
It's just reappeared now. Now it's getting smaller.
Okay. Okay, I'll just go without the gray box. Those are just my notes. So yeah, hello, welcome everyone. As Jackie introduced us, my name is Aman. I'm an MA student at SFU Urban Studies, and I'll be co-presenting with my friend Jasmeen Virk, and we'll be giving you a snapshot of community engaged research in Newton, Surrey, and just mostly sharing our journey in that space and how we got there and started doing this work. And just, yeah.
Hello, I muted my mic because there was construction noises outside. So sorry if it disturbs anyone. Yeah, I'm Jasmeen. It's nice to meet you all. And so I'm a visual designer, and I also work as a videographer and photographer and just a creative person around Surrey. And I like to explore different stories that come out from Surrey, because Surrey is a growing city, and so there's a lot of interesting things coming out these days as well. So I like to explore that from my side.
And this is a very special picture to us that was taken by one of the the artist founder of the garden that we're going to be talking about today, Don Lee Leger, and he recently passed away. So I want to dedicate this presentation and our work to just continue his legacy and everything that he's inspired us to do in that space and as researchers. And also we want to acknowledge that Newton, Surrey is located on the unceded traditional territories and homelands of the Semiahmoo, Katsi, Coquitlam, Kwantlen, Kekat, and Tsawwassen First Nations. And we also want to localize like where we are at. So we're talking about Newton, and it's a very large and diverse neighborhood in Surrey. As of 2016, 27% of Surrey's population lives in this area here. In particular, we really want to focus on this little dot here, and that's the Newton Exchange area, the bus loop area. And just speaking of the perception around the space, and this is what I've been interested in as the resident there and as a researcher, is how people talk about Newton. And, like when you look at, when you just type Newton, Surrey, these sort of like titles come up. How safe is Newton? Is the Newton area in Surrey safe? So yeah, it's like very negative, and the media, the negative like portrayal of Newton really intensified in when Julie Pascal, local mom, was murdered and robbed and murdered in broad daylight. And that brought a lot of negative attention to the space for obvious reasons, but it also brought a lot of artists and activists and community organizers in that space to address issues of unsafety and for women and for marginalized folks. So yeah, this is the area of focus for my research as well, and for our community work in that space too.
All right. So zooming in further, this particular area is something we want to focus on today. So as you can see, there's a little circle in the patch of green grass, and there's garden beds in shape of sun rays coming, emanating out of the circles, and the circle represents medicine wheel, whereas the garden beds are kind of course, are emanating the sun rays. And so this place is called The Plot, and is surrounded by the Newton ice rink on the left, where Aman mentioned there was a murder in daylight of Julie Pascal, and that's the building that it happened around. So we're very close to where a lot of this, so the place where a lot of media attention comes from, and a lot of negative media attention comes from. So we're kind of in the heart of that. And right top right of this plot garden is the Newton Library, Senior Center, and there's the strip mall. So although it's a very busy area, lots of people walking around, it's still quite tucked away, and it's hard to find unless you're a walker and you like to explore what's happening around these buildings. Yeah, and then we want to share our Newton story and how we got to know Newton and what it means to us. So for me in particular, I've lived in Surrey for the past 13 years, and I grew up here, went to high school here, but I lived in North Surrey. So Newton itself was kind of a distant land that I rarely went to, mainly maybe to buy a groceries here and there. So it was, my relationship with Newton was, it wasn't really there. Except one day I went to the library and was walking towards the bus loop, and I happened to cross this green area, and I see that there's lots of garden beds. It seems like people have come here and did a lot of work and worked hard to create a really beautiful space. And at the time, the energy was just very captivating. So I stayed and I spent some time. And at the same time, I was in university, and this is around 2017. So I was in university taking a film class. So one of our projects was to create a short documentary, and it seemed like this was the perfect place to create a documentary on. As I spent more time, I came back, I met the people, and I learned that this garden is actually a sharing garden, meaning it's not something you pay to grow food in. It's free for all. So the principle is really how to serve the community, grow free organic food, and at the same time create a sense of community, create a safe space. And like I mentioned, it's around Newton Rink. It was very unsafe space at the time. So Don and Coralie Leger, the two artists, started this place in 2016. And so if you go to the next slide, I would just want to quickly talk about my process of documentary making in this space. Again, so I was doing two things at once. I was going there and connecting with people, and I realized more and more how important and integral this place was becoming to Newton community, and to create a sense of something positive, bringing light and warmth to a place that for so long was seeing a lot of negativity in media. So to me, learning that these people are coming, from all over Surrey, but a lot of these people are very local to Newton, walked to the garden and volunteered, and learning their stories was really, really, it was really easy to put together a documentary because the narrative was just right there, like in front of me. So, so my process was connecting with the community, becoming comfortable around them, and them becoming comfortable around me. And this was a group project, so I wasn't the only one working. It was Anna, Yasmeen, and Jasmeen, me. Working on this together, and then we decided that we wanted to capture footage, so we started bringing in our cameras, and we were very curious. So we would make sure that people were comfortable around our cameras, and ask a lot of questions, and get to know their personal stories and their connection with this place. And then eventually, once the documentary was done, the community, some members of the community came and watched the documentary showcased in, I believe it was Queen's. I don't know the theater's name. It's in Vancouver. And then it was given back to the community. Right now it lives on theplot.ca. homepage, and it gets used as a reference point. And anytime anyone at the plot wants to speak to the plot, what it stands for, the documentary gets shown. Yeah, so that's been my process for engaging with the community and also creating work that kind of serves it and showcases it in its best light.
So my journey in the plot was through Jasmeen. So I just kind of followed her while she was doing the documentary there. And at that time I was living in Vancouver, and I lived in Vancouver since I immigrated there in 2006. And my family in 2018 bought a house because Newton is also a place where housing, it was very affordable when we were in 2018. So we bought a place, but I was not really feeling connected to the space. And again, the negative perception of Newton really impacted me, and I didn't want to walk outside because I just didn't connect to the community, to the people. So I was feeling very isolated. So thanks to Jasmeen, she took me to this place, which I kind of checked on everything that I was looking for. There's gardening, there's art, and it's free. So just very barrier-free space where I can just build this new community and interact with this new environment that I was in. And as I stayed in that space, went to garden and chatted with different people, things serious issues like safety, low engagement, increase in homelessness, increase in hidden homelessness, drug use in the space, all these things started coming up. And so yeah, we just didn't know how to I personally didn't know how to deal with these issues, and I was seeing them in the space too, and a lot of people are struggling with them, and a lot of people had good intentions to do something about these things. So that kind of led me to pursue my MA in urban studies, to just understand how I can better serve my community and just understand these issues and advocate for grassroots groups in Surrey. So my research question has been shaped into this now. How have artists, artivists addressed critical urban issues of food insecurity, homelessness, placemaking, and safety through temporary art-based interventions in Newton, Surrey from 2013 to 2020? What motivated them to propose these interventions, and what do they think are the opportunities and barriers in doing such work within a suburban context? So here, I'm doing something where I'm not really just talking about the plot. I'm mapping out all the activism and community engagement that's happened in that space from 2013 to 2020. And I just wrapped up my data collection, and it's been interesting to see how Newton as a suburb is being regarded by the residents there. Some people view it as an urban place, some people view it as a space in between, and some people really see it as a suburban place. So that's something interesting that I'm thinking of right now after just coming out of data collection in COVID. My conceptual frameworks are this. So I am trying to come up with a definition of what art activism looks like in that space. And I'm using the socially engaged art and public art and things like that to kind of create a framework for the work that's happening, work that's happened and is happening in that space. And DIY urbanism is informal urbanism, is that it's community led. It's not planners are the ones that are making the decision. It's the community that's altering the space to serve it, to serve their needs. And this one is pretty major since COVID has hit, is creative care work. From 2013 to 2020, I noticed that just tracking that, a lot of people have come into the space and offered a lot of energy, but they leave very burnt out and just, are not able to engage anymore in a positive way with the space. So I just want to look at what that burnout looks like and just the politics of care. So just bringing that in and maybe advocating for more sport structures and sport networks for people that do this sort of work in the community. And then finally, artists in the suburbs, just seeing again, the suburb has been Newton as a suburb has been a weird sort of statement because it's changing now. It's just to see what are the infrastructures that exist or the lack of infrastructures in Newton to support artists in doing this work. And how, so yeah, again, I'm an insider researcher at the plot, but, I am not an insider in other spaces. And in the past, I was not part of the groups that had been in that space before. And my research is community engaged research, where I have involved the community in several aspects of my development of my research question, and just in the way like creating a data sharing plan, and at the end the research is to benefit the community. I'm going to be working with Jasmeen to create a documentary at the end as a knowledge mobilization piece, to take what I've done in my research and translate that into something visual, something more interesting than just reading what I've written, which can be quite boring no matter how much I try to make it interesting. So I've done 21 interviews so far, and I needed to stop because there's so much, with community engaged research and snowball sampling, people just want to share their stories, and I like listening to stories. So, I just put a halt on the 21 interviews now. I'm just going to start transcribing them. I had a lot of fun introducing walking as a methodology in my research, just as a tool to provoke memory, and just like being in the space. So I had to advocate really hard for this in COVID. So, we've been going out for walks. I went out for a walk with just me and other folks, and we had disposable cameras, and we just walked around and took pictures and talked about the space and what it means to them. Yeah.
Yep, thanks, Aman. Going back to the plot, I just wanted to quickly capture a picture of what we did before, pre-pandemic, and then what we did after. And so before, we would hold events, have work parties in the garden, and that significantly reduced. And I mean, it came to a complete halt at some point in 2020. But in around 2020, when things were really bad, we, as a community, especially this project called Care Basket Initiative, spearheaded by Aman and Rella, became kind of our response to help as much as we could, and again, working on the principle of providing free food, fresh free food to our local community. So during COVID, for those who couldn't leave the house for various reasons, we delivered to 40 households over the span of 6 months, as I mentioned before. And this was our way to create that responsibility, and also to make sure we take that responsibility seriously of providing food. And it was a really good program. And again, bringing it back to feeling exhausted, it wasn't something we could do forever. And so at some point we had to press pause, as we had to take care of ourselves. However, it still shows that the community can be strong through hard times, as we brought people together to volunteer and help us out delivering these boxes. So and then I want to make our way to the documentary. So this is the project that I worked on that I mentioned, and it's around 5 minutes. So let's watch that.
The plot started in March, actually February of 2016. It was an art food project started by Dawn and Coralie Leger. It's not allotment gardens, it's a sharing garden that you don't have to have membership for, and you don't have ownership, specific personal ownership, but it's a collective community ownership. Anybody can come in and work in it, and anybody can harvest, and you can't steal the food because the food's free. So that was part of the premise. And then people just started showing up. We had maybe a dozen people to begin with that were invited in, and then community would walk by, and someone would stop by and say, oh, I work out on Sundays, but I'll come here instead. And pretty soon we just had more and more people coming in and joining. It just evolved. We started having Sunday potlucks, and people from the whole community would get together, and it was amazing to see the intercultural, intergenerational kinds of gatherings. Some people had nothing, were homeless. Some people had, huge houses in South Surrey, and they were sitting at the same table together. Somehow outside people feel way more comfortable than they do in an indoor space. I've seen people meeting, that somebody's picking beans and all of a sudden they've met their Italian neighbor they didn't even know existed, They go off in Italian and they're very excited, and I've seen people from the community exchanging recipes from different cultures and coming together in that way. So this is so much more than a garden. It's so much more than a garden, where food is the thing that brings people together. It's common to all people, something we all need, and it inspires people. It gives them something to connect over. It's been amazing watching over the past 2 years, people come forward. Each person that's come into the garden has offered some piece that's needed. And it's the volunteers, it's all the volunteers, it's all the people that come forward that have made this garden what it is. People sometimes spend just a few hours, or sometimes many, many, many hours. Some of the volunteers come from a very cultivated background. Some of them that come forth and volunteer have a lot of personal challenges, have perhaps even challenges with substance abuse, alcoholism. And there's something about the mix, about the ability for people to cross those boundaries and bridges with each other. And for me, that's powerful, because that speaks to what this garden is about, which is about the heart of the community and about nurturing every heart that comes in here. And it's almost like the land does that all on its own. It just frees people to be a little kinder to each other, a little kinder to themselves, and it just shifts things somehow. That to me is a real magical piece about community and how it works in a space like this.
That's all from us.
Thank you so much,
you.
Aman. Thank you so much, Jasmeen. Well, I'd like to, for all of everybody, to take a little breath as we come out of that, and I'd love to warmly welcome Alicia back to the space when you can. Just to have a little conversation between everybody. Jasmeen, I really appreciated the beauty of how so beautifully shot, and I love the bit of sound that you'd laid underneath that video. It really, I think, speaks to it sounds like things growing and percolating. It's really inspiring to be able to see that kind of cultivation of community, and in a context that has been so polarizing, I think really really fraught, both in the public conversation and also as Aman was sharing how people had personally experienced the space to be able to create something else. It's really, I think, so crucial. I think that also the piece here about thinking about how to build a different kind of space is really generative and interesting when we think about care work and care practice. And I'd love to invite folks to come forward if they want to ask a question. They're welcome to come into the space and wave their hand and ask us in person if you'd like to, or you could also type your questions in the chat. But one of the things that I might like to do to kick off this discussion, we'll do this for about 10 minutes or so, is would love to invite any reflections from Alicia, just in kind of watching that video and thinking about your own reflections around what care work can look like, and what is the antidote to this exhaustion that people have been experiencing.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was such a pleasure to watch. It really is such a joyful piece. So congratulations, Jasmeen and Aman. It's beautiful. In terms of preliminary reflections, I think that, you guys have said it, of course, but I'll just echo you in that a lot of care, I think, happens and needs to happen in some of the basic elements of how we live our lives. So, feminist scholars and feminist human beings have been talking about this for a long time. Things like the places that we live, the people that we talk to, the food that we eat, how we care for our bodies. All of these things are fundamental to how we live, and that includes in all of the community-based research, community-based projects, anything that we're doing. So when we think about how to incorporate care work into perhaps like a more institutionalized academic setting, I think one of the most fundamental things to do is to bring it back to basics and ask ourselves, how are we caring for ourselves and how are we caring for the people around us? Are we feeding them? Are their children able to be cared for? Can they pay their rent? Do they have a secure position? Because these things they're not tangential, right? These things are at the forefront of our minds. If we haven't had a meal that day, if we don't know if we can pay our rent next month, if we don't really know if our children are in secure care right now and we're thinking about them, those are all things that are going to inevitably come through in the work, and they really compound with some of the exhaustion and energy demands that this work can have in those, again, best of times. So for me, thinking about care work is something that we must think about in a sort of holistic sense. It just does not work if we isolate it to how can we care for Jasmeen on this one project. It's not really how humans live our lives. And I think that in the way that we conceptualize care work, we need to open our minds a little bit and ask people, how do you need to be cared for? Because sometimes they might tell you, I need a place to live. And that's not the project you're working on, but that's the type of care that your project needs.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I really resonated with your comments about holistic approaches to this work, and really creating a space that doesn't ignore that which exists beyond the realm of this project work, and that is also very much impacting the way that people show up in any given space or don't show up to these spaces. And I think that, to me, at least from where I'm sitting, sometimes the limitations that exist when we think about for example, the subject of this particular session within this conference is about community campus partnerships. And I think that sometimes if we just think about it in those realms, the campus and the community as distinct entities that could come together in a partnership as like a kind of professional contract, it misses out on the messy facts and the humanity of our lives and the ways in which all of you in this room who are speaking and contributing as panelists, I think that your own identities and the way that you experience things are very much outside of those binaries, and I would suggest that many people experience things that way as well. So it's different than just creating projects. It's something about approaching the work in a different way. Anne is raising his hand. Welcome a question from you.
Hi, thanks all for your presentation. I just wanted to build on Jackie's point there. It seems to me that inside of civil society organizations, there's still this fundamental divide around charity versus social justice and the comfort level of working. And certainly that similar dynamic plays out in the relationship between universities and communities in terms of how to orient that around a more justice-oriented approach. And even the word service learning gets used. When I hear the word service, it kind of has that charity connotation. I was just in a discussion in the other national session where some of this stuff came up, but I'm just wondering if each of you could just share how that kind of charity versus social justice divide comes up in terms of either you see it within community and in the way that people are working, or between the university and community, and what kind of agency you have in the unique roles you're in to kind of try to flip that.
This is really, that's a great question. And it's something that we're dealing with right now in our space in Newton. So, like, because we are just kind of like a loose, informal group and we don't really have a structure, like, it's just like whoever shows up has ownership over that space, even though Jasmeen and I have like a official contract that we sign with the city. That's quite scary because there's a lot of liabilities, a lot of like language around like, if we do this, you're gonna get fined for that. If somebody overdoses in the spot, you're supposed to report it, even though like we're caretaking for the space and doing all this work for free for the city. So we've been approached by several organizations to like turn ourselves into like a cooperative or like a nonprofit or something, so we have some sort of like stability and not so precarious. And we've been thinking about this too, like what does that, like how do we partner with like institutions like SFU or like, like other like diversity without losing the freedom that this project is built on, right? Like, which is just like anybody can come in and just do whatever that they want. And we lack spaces like that. Like, people don't have to ask for permission to use the space. They can just kind of like go guerrilla in this space and like freely express themselves. And like it's been tricky. Like we do struggle with getting grants and funding just because we don't have any sort of any like nonprofit. We're not incorporated as anything. But I think we've been wanting to stay true to our original social justice sort of like lens, that we don't want to like become part of something. And this is where like, actually, I really appreciate SFU's community engaged initiative during COVID last summer for really trusting us and supporting our project and not asking for receipts and just giving us the money to do this work without getting us to sign any contracts or, like any sort of like putting any liabilities on us. And I really appreciated that sort of like partnership, right? Like that there's this trust for the community and for people like us. So we don't have to like write these massive grants, which we did write a grant, but it was like the way that partnership was handled was that the money was just transferred over to like my account. And I was trusted to use that money to do something for the community, which we did. But I really like that we like, unlike our relationship with the city where we're constantly like penalized for, like having trees that are up to this high or like whatever, like it kind of encourages us to continue doing more work, and also like prevents burnout in that way when you have that support and you're not pushing back. I just wanted to share that.
Jasmeen, do you want to weigh in before me?
Aman and I, we work so closely at the plot. We kind of have similar thoughts about kind of everything plot related. But it's so true. And I think we if we could ideally get resources that without question just kind of trusted us to do our job in this space, we would definitely feel less burned out. And we could, like right now, we do want to have that social justice aspect of the place, and the place itself stands for something big, which is to provide free organic food to our community, which is rare to do, right? Rare to see. However, it takes a lot of people coming together to do that. So we've been finding it's really difficult in COVID to continue to stand up for what we believe in. But hopefully things resolve over time, and we continue. And again, having support of the city would be great in a bigger way than how we are supported right now. So here's hoping that we continue to get more support from SFU, more support from City of Surrey and other places. And I really want to see this project grow and be spread throughout, different localities as well.
Yeah, I'll just speak quickly because I don't want to take up too much time, but I think it's such an interesting question, Am, and I love your guys' answer because I think there's such a fundamental tension in a lot of ways between sort of like the institutionalization, which provides you the legitimacy, can provide you the funding, can provide you, it can open all the doors to sort of like let you actually do all the work that we want to do sometimes. And on the other hand, it can be the thing that can prevent you from doing the work, and figuring out that balance. I have not got it right yet. It would be wonderful if anybody can tell me how to do that, because I think it's a huge challenge from a more institutionalized perspective, working with a lot of folks at SFU and at other universities who do this type of work. I think especially for sort of really sort of entrenched faculty, sometimes the difference between service work and social justice work can be extremely uncomfortable, because a lot of social justice work can mean critiquing the systems that those people may have benefited from, or may not even be complicit in, but may be foundational to how they built their careers and to where they sort of see themselves now. So unfortunately, sometimes presenting a move from purely service into the social justice space, I think can be sometimes a tension-filled conversation. It can be uncomfortable, but I think in most of the people on this call, that's a conversation we think is necessary, right? And it doesn't mean it's easy, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be something that everyone is going to agree with. But I think moving beyond sort of a service approach that really only is situated within furthering the status quo into moving towards a social justice approach, even within more institutional projects, where we can look not only to do this work, but to do it in a way that may require radical change, that may require saying, you know what, we didn't do this right before, or that thing that we established 20 years ago probably wasn't the best way to do that. And those are not always going to be fun conversations, but I think for taking people really seriously, listening to what we need and moving forward, for me, that's really important. And I think as sort of not to put words in your mouth, but as you sort of alluded to, there is a tension, right, between a service-only oriented approach and moving fully into a social justice mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that tension certainly is illuminated in these times, and will be something that I certainly will be carrying with me as we go forward too. My last question for all of you as we kind of wrap up our session here is related to what the path forward looks like for us here in BC. Just within the last hour, the provincial health officers have announced a new restart plan for British Columbia, moving through the worst parts of the pandemic. And I'm really curious from your perspectives about what kinds of lessons or learnings do we need to keep at the front of our mind as we move into an adjustment period that is transitioning us out of this current distanced reality, this time of isolation, into a more integrated context again. And particularly thinking about the questions around exhaustion, burnout, the lack of kind of holistic care structures that exist that you've seen more clearly in these times. I'm curious about how you're thinking about moving through and forward with those pieces in mind. And I wonder if we could move from, perhaps it could be Aman, Jasmeen, and Alicia speaking.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and something that Jasmeen and I have been thinking about too is like, what are the steps forward for, like, what do we learn from COVID, and like from my research, speaking to different folks and people from the people that have been in that space before and left because of burnout, like what did they need from the community, and how did they need to be heard or seen, you know, and we noticed that, yeah, like one of the things that we want to do is like really acknowledge people for the work that they've done in the space. And that's a big factor that we notice, that I've been noticing in my research. One thing that leads to burnout is just being unseen, and just working behind the scene, and like nobody's seeing your work or appreciating your work, or you feeling that sort of lack. So yeah, I think moving forward, like for us in the plot would be to just to have like more spaces to just express and to ideate together, and yeah, and just like really appreciate our time and not take for granted, and like maybe build that community resilience. Maybe that will build our community resilience stronger, so we are more like prepared for shocks like COVID-19 or whatever that's to come in the future. Right? Like, how do we stay connected as a community? How do we support the most vulnerable amongst us, without like, you know, making them feel like they're victims and things like that. That's something that we also struggle with. A lot of people that we speak with, you know, come from, they have some trauma, and, you know, they don't want to be labeled as victim. They want to be active. And so, you know, that's, yeah, like, I don't know. I don't think we have a correct answer yet. We just are figuring it out. But yeah, we definitely need to attract more people into that space. That's for sure. Like, we know like people have been coming more into green spaces in Surrey just because they're working from home, and like they're kind of exploring their neighborhood, and people have been coming to the garden and like spaces around, and like really been interested in the history. So, you know, we want to take that opportunity and really elevate the space, to have more people come in and like change it up and however they want to, right? And just promote this like community ownership of the space, and like, and especially amongst youth, is that you know, they can do stuff to public spaces. Like they can maybe paint rocks, or like, I don't know, create an art project or something, that there is a space where they won't be, you know, like penalized or like fined or whatever for doing. So they can do it here. So, and we want to encourage the creation of more of those like open, inclusive spaces in Surrey, and use our garden and what we do as a model for that. Yeah.
Thanks, Aman. Jasmeen.
Thank you, Aman. I have a short anecdote to share. Earlier and before going into lockdown, we had our first and last event at the Plot Garden, and it was around the Holi celebration, which is festival of, well, it's a festival of colors in India. So we wanted to celebrate here and we saw a lot of the South Asian community was coming through the garden. So I wanted to put something together and bring people together. And one thing that really, really helped me at the time was Rella, who works hard at the garden. She is very dedicated to its cause. Of course, she's been feeling burnt out herself, but last year before going into lockdown, she sat me down. She said, you know, whatever it is that you need, I'm here. Whatever it is that you need to create a good event, you know, just call me. Just call me anytime. So that having that support in the back, I've never organized an event before. I just felt so confident to do it on my own. So having that trust from someone, from support from someone, just really, I would say I would have probably felt burnt out by the end of the event if it wasn't for her. So that's really important. And what Alicia said about asking, what is it that I need as someone who is in the community? What is it that other people that I'm working with, what do they need as part of the work, as part of caring However, I do also find that people who work in communities who dedicate their time actually have really hard time expressing their needs as well. They don't know what they need. So how do you figure that out as well? So I think going forward, I want to reflect on that a bit more. How do you get someone to identify their needs? What is it that can really help them to not feel burnt out? So I'm finding we have a lot of people that have been working hard at the garden, and definitely we haven't had the resources to properly acknowledge their contributions. So like Aman said, we would really love to do that more going forward.
Thanks so much, Jasmeen. Finally, Alicia.
Thank you so much. And I completely agree, Jasmeen. It is absolutely such an ongoing challenge. I mean, even myself, I always say I'm my own worst advocate, because I think a lot of us who do this type of community work, we'll say, oh, it's fine. I'll just do that thing, or I'll just finish that, or I'll just work an extra hour. And unfortunately, we can be the worst for reminding ourselves that we do have needs that need to be met. But I think for me, I could probably go on about this for an hour, but I won't. To keep on our theme of sort of care, I think one of the things that I have learned from the pandemic, and that I would like to have hopefully other people have learned as well, is that resilient communities and communities that will move forward in a positive ways are communities that are underpinned by infrastructures of care. And this is both formal and informal. And I think that the pandemic has revealed this, unfortunately, in horrible ways. We saw that our elder care, our long-term care, our child care systems, our care for women, our care for racialized communities, our care for folks without homes, all of these systems are inadequate, and they failed. They failed miserably. There were thousands of preventable deaths in privatized care infrastructure that we absolutely could have done without. And I think that one of the things that I want to learn and that I want to remember is that it is unacceptable for us to see care and see the ways that we support ourselves and our community members, our comrades, our brothers and sisters, our families as expendable aspects of capitalist economies. They're not. Things like healthcare, things like childcare, things like caring for our parents and our grandparents should not be commodities. And we can see this now in a horrible way. But now that it has been revealed, I am just desperate to ensure that as a society, we don't forget this horrible lesson we have to learn. I hope that in moving forward, we can continue to do all of the projects that we want to do, but we can do them in a way that, my colleagues have good childcare for their children and they're not afraid when they come to work, that my parents, my grandmother with Alzheimer's can be cared for and I'm not afraid for her safety. Those types of bare minimums, again, I don't see as tangential to moving forward in a way to carry out good, inclusive, collaborative work. And I think we've seen some moves for this, the federal budget, giant healthcare plan, right? So these are lessons that I think we are in a moment where we seem to be recognizing them, but I am very afraid that this moment could slip away and we could forget these lessons. And I think it was a painful lesson to learn. And I personally am determined that we do not let it forget. And the care economy must be something that we fight for. And this is a moment in time where we need to grasp it and we need to hold on to it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Aman. Thank you, Jasmeen. These last reflections particularly are so powerful in terms of thinking about where we move from here, particularly refusing to simply come back to how it was, because obviously that was an incredibly inequitable reality in which people were living in such struggle and in such pain for so long. And so the questions now are very much about how to acknowledge that and act upon it, and act upon it in a good way. So I thank everybody for joining us in this session, and I thank you all for all of your continued work in these arenas. I think that Tyne had one more slide to share before we close our time together, as well as some other information about the conference as it continues. This is something that is going on across Canada over this afternoon as well as tomorrow. And there's more information about that in the chat and also on the slide. But in the midst of all of this, I really just want to extend my sincere thanks to all three of you for your time today, and particularly for, I think, a really exemplary and unique and needed approach to this work that that deeply acknowledges and acts on and works with the intersections that people are living with, and that are really important to continue considering as we move through. So thank you to all of you, and I hope that you have a lovely afternoon with some rest and care in it as well. And we'll see you all next time. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.